Well, hello there. It's Monday, the 20th of September, and for the rest of the day, you can get the ebook version of the Fen Witch of GoosefeatherSplit for free on Kindle. So, as it's my birthday, I thought I'd give copies of that. And I'm going to read a small section from it now. At the time the curiosity about my mother's fate arose, I was at that point in secondary school, coming towards the end of year 8, when a young man has to prove himself worthy. I had a few friends with shared interests. Mark and Colin were best friends, and I was the tag-along that hung out with them at school. We'd trade horror movies, and I'd occasionally go over to one of their houses to watch films with them. Obviously, they never got invited back to mine. I had an obsession with the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I can't watch them now. Colin reckoned he could get hold of the last film in the series, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, from his cousin in the States. It would be mine if I'd go to GoosefeatherSplit and bring back a blackthorn branch as proof of my bravery. Of course, I wanted to ingratiate myself further with them. I didn't want to feel like a tag-along beside their duo. I wanted to elevate my status to be their equal. Others at school claimed to have been to GoosefeatherSplits. Many said they'd been there and nothing happened. They'd frozen, got covered in mud, and wasted their time. Some claimed to have summoned the witch and asked her a question, and she'd responded. Funnily enough, their descriptions all varied, and they had little to show from their encounter. I set out early one Sunday morning on a misty day in mid-March. It's not an exciting walk from the village to GoosefeatherSplit. There's the long route which follows the river as it twists and turns, the view taking in fields of various crops and a plethora of dilapidated barns, but you can cut part of that off by following the drainage ditches that run alongside the droves. I picked one of these up behind the playing fields. I passed behind a small holding, the only place local that kept geese. On the ground behind the farm I spotted a cluster of feathers, so I picked up a decent-sized one, took my penknife from my pocket, and split the feather into a large V, then continued on my way. The recent rain made my trainers sink into the boggy path. I avoided the waterlogged hollows marked with the tyre tread of tractors, but it made the journey slower than I'd expected. By the time I got close, the sun was trying to shine through, giving the fog an almost dazzling quality, and turning the weeds, particularly the leaves on the stinging nettles, verdant. Eventually, I reached my destination. From the apex of the rise, I refused to acknowledge it as a hill. The flora changed, like the site of a nuclear disaster that had wiped out almost all life. The grass faded away to soil, and the blackthorns were the only thing that grew there, twisted and corrupt. From the first of those, I snapped the stick as proof of my journey, but that was no longer my primary motive. I had to find out about Mum. A gap between the blackthorns led to the marshy water. Elsewhere in the fens, waterways had reeds and rushes springing out everywhere. Here, there was nothing. A couple of metres into the water, a muddy black islet rose out. I put my hand into my pocket, and for a second I thought I'd lost it, that it must have fallen out as I made my way to GoosefeatherSplit. But then I placed my fingers on it. I took out the feather and held it towards the water. A gust hit me from behind. On an otherwise still day, it took me by surprise and snatched the feather from my fingers. It rode momentarily on the wind before falling into the murky water. At first, it rested on the surface. I wanted to grab it, but the second I moved towards that split goose feather, it sunk into the marsh. As soon as it had disappeared, she rose. I saw for the first time that which has so often been echoed in my nightmares. I blurted out my question before she fully emerged, when only a mass of black hair stuck out of the water. What happened to my mum? when she stood there, this impossible woman who was responsible for all the ill in my life, the filthy water dripping from her clothes and her razor fingers pointing at me, I didn't have the guts to wait for a response. I ran. I hated myself for fleeing. My gutless reaction had cost me the knowledge of what happened to Mum. Even though I'd carried the blackthorn branch from her domain and taken it back to the village, I never presented it to Colin. Cowards don't deserve rewards. I never did get to see that film. I had plenty of nightmares of my own after that. So there you go. That's apart from when the main character Charlie in this is a child. It has 2 time frames before he returns to GoosefeatherSplit in the present and has to face the witch again. Thank you very much for listening.